Hi everyone, Goldie Chan here, and I am so excited for today. Now today is very special. It is a debate, and we will be talking about the merits of influencer marketing. And joining me today are two very special guests. And very quickly, for everyone out there in the audience who might not know who I am, first of all, I'm Goldie Chan. I'm on the board of VidCon. Love VidCon. I am a founder at Warm Robots, a social media strategy agency. But let's go over to our two amazing folks who will be doing the debate today, and that is Kevin Toomey and Brendan Gan.
My name is Kevin Toomey. I'm the Senior Marketing Director for Mars Discovery District, not to be confused with the chocolate bar company. Mars Discovery District is North America's largest urban innovation hub. We support 1,400 startups within Canada, helping them with branding, connection to customers and talent, and helping their company scale. And I'm responsible for the Mars brand and also advising the startups.
Awesome. So I'm Brendan Gan, like Goldie mentioned. I'm a partner and chief social officer at Mechanism. We're an independent creative agency. This past year, the Effies named us one of the top 10 most effective independent ad agencies out there. We do a lot of work with Fortune 500 brands, and I've been deep in the influencer marketing space for a long time now. Did my first YouTuber brand integration deal back in 2006. Was actually at the very first VidCon and have been to all the US ones. And in addition to Goldie, I also sit on the advisory board. I'm super passionate about this space.
So I love that intro from both of you guys. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now, this is a spicy debate, right? I think that there are quite a few people who are on either side of the equation. And I know, of course, quite a few folks on my end who work as influencers, but I'll be quite honest, I know quite a few folks who definitely do not believe in influencer marketing at all. But before we get into the meat of that, I want to start super top level for everyone out there who might not be as familiar with marketing as an ecosystem in general. So let's start there. Let's start with thinking about how marketing as a whole has changed and how has this really impacted influencer marketing. Who wants to start?
I'll kick things off, but maybe actually real quick is just, do you guys think it'd be worth refreshing and giving people some context in terms of how this would come about, or should we just dive on in?
Absolutely. So apologies to everyone. There was a very fun back and forth that happened between Brendan and Kevin. In fact, I've linked to it both in my personal LinkedIn account, so go ahead and check that out. But Brandon also linked to it, so check it out on his LinkedIn account as well. But there are two competing articles. We'll call them competing because that's a nice way to say it. One on one side, let's just say that Kevin is maybe not the most pro influencer marketing, and Brendan had a rebuttal for that. And then they came together and wrote a really lovely article in Ad Age. And so that is a disclaimer about how we came about to even do this debate, because there are so many people who honestly, I think, want to argue against and maybe for both Kevin and Brendan. So this to me is such a fun, almost evergreen concept, especially if we think about the last couple of years where influencer marketing certainly, whether or not you believe in it, has been on the rise in terms of usage with brands.
Awesome. Yeah. And I apologize. I just thought it'd be good for context in terms of how this all came about, and definitely encourage you guys to read those. So we're not going to try and rehash everything here, but I'll take a crack at it in terms of like how I see the space changing, 2019 versus today. And I think what we're seeing in particular on the backs of COVID and the pandemic, brands have really shifted away, or maybe not shifted away, but they're really prioritizing more performance, and they're less focused on kind of the, just typical brand-centric campaigns, brand building campaigns. And obviously, you're a hammer, you look at everything as a nail, and I look at it through the lens of the impact on influencer marketing. And I see the shift, obviously, very much towards digital and social, and then influencer marketing in particular. I think influencers have really benefited because they're nimble, comparatively inexpensive, and I would say they're pretty effective. And I was looking at some data recently, and obviously ad spends are down across the board, but influencer investments are down only 3% compared to 20% for social media overall, which is probably the least hit medium right now.
And I think Kevin has a few comments to share about this. Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Goldie. So for a bit of context, my background has been in all sorts of marketing and advertising. I started off on the traditional creative side, very focused on brand with agencies in Ireland and the Netherlands. And then when I moved to Canada 5 years ago, I was actually, believe it or not, I know people will probably be surprised, I was heavily involved in the influencer space in Canada. I was working with one of the leading agencies in Canada, and they were leading the way with influencer marketing. And I sort of got to see how the sausage was made. And I think that's where the article came from that Brendan and Goldie was talking about. And I sort of built up this, I've tried to build up a holistic 360 marketing view. And what I'm seeing over the last probably 5 years, and I feel it's coming to a head now, is that there has been this tension and divide between brand marketing and performance marketing. And I think the best brands in the world are the ones that are doing both. But unfortunately, and I think the advertising agencies, marketers, brands, the whole ecosystem, the whole industry only has itself to blame for creating this divide between brand and performance. We know that performance is hugely important for driving sales, but we also know that brand is really important to increase those sales over a longer period of time, and also help brands charge more for their products and services. So it's not just about volume of sales, it's about the value of those sales plus volume. And I think influencer marketing has sort of been hugely popular as a performance marketing tactic. But maybe what has been lost by many, and not just those that work in influencer marketing, but those that work in marketing as a whole, they have lost sight of the bigger picture, looking at brand and performance. I would recommend, there is a fascinating book by Binet and Fields. It's a classic piece of work called The Long and the Short of It. And it looks at the long-term marketing and short-term marketing. And it's not either or, it's and. And I think, despite what Brendan and I are going to chat about shortly about influencer marketing, if there's any people that are listening or tuned in that are responsible for a brand, that are responsible for the growth of a brand and a business, don't look at just either or, look at brand and performance. There's a ton of research out there that says that brand is important, so is performance, and they both work in hand together.
Well, let's jump into that. So I love to do basic definitions for everyone in the audience, because not everyone is a beautiful, magical pro marketer like hopefully the three of us are on this wonderful chat. So brand marketing versus performance marketing. Because I'm a school teacher, I'm going to assign each of you to define one of them. So Brendan, can you define what brand marketing is for us?
Yeah, I would say brand marketing is more when you're focused on a campaign or initiative that's about increasing the having a positive impact on the perception of the brand. You're focused more on what people think of the brand versus going in for that hard sale.
And Kevin, what is performance marketing?
For me, performance marketing is more short-term marketing, with a greater focus on having a direct link to sales and revenue.
Okay, so put on the boxing gloves. I want to hear your thoughts on, now that we have definitions, which I love doing, let's get into it. Brand marketing versus performance marketing. Clearly, these are tied to influencer marketing, especially when we think about short-term campaigns that are maybe not as long-term and they don't last for decades at a time. So what do you think is more effective, especially, and I'll put the caveat on that, right now in 2020, which, as we all know, is a very special kind of year.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
I think Goldie, it's not going back to my point. It's not either or. You need both. It's not one is more effective than the other. I think in times of uncertainty, especially economic uncertainty, again, there's research to back it up that shows that companies that invest in brand and performance marketing, when we come out the other side of the recession, and if you look at any economic news or business news, there is forecasts for a recession coming probably globally because of COVID. And brands need to try and make the argument for why they should be continuing to maintain their level of investment in their brand and their performance, if not increasing it. And I think also a symptom that has cropped up over the last number of years, and again, the marketing community and marketing professionals only have themselves to blame, is that the language that marketeers talk in about performance and measuring impact, when you go to your CEO or your chief operating officer and use metrics in terms like, oh, brand awareness, equity is up, they don't really care. They're saying, what is the dollar figure? And not enough marketing professionals are able to show the direct link from marketing to return on marketing investment. And so I think if the best marketers in the world are able to have that argument with their CEO and CFO going, our marketing investment is generating X return on investment. If we increase it by 10%, 15%, especially during a recession, when media buys can be cheaper, and I'm sure influencers can potentially be cheaper as well, we will be able to increase our revenue by X on the other side. So I don't think it's either or. Again, in terms of current economic environment, you need both.
So you're really thinking about ROI. Brendan, I'd love to hear your take.
Yeah, and maybe a good place to start is where I agree with Kevin. And I agree. I don't think they're mutually exclusive in any way, shape, or form. And I would say that there certainly are a lot of brands that think really short term, in particular with influencer marketing. And the perception, I think, of influencers and the way so many agencies and brands have approached it as, this is a media outlet. We just need distribution. And I would argue that's completely the wrong way to approach them. You wouldn't work with Michael Jordan and have him push out or wear a pair of Nikes in one game. It would just be the dumbest thing ever. And so, but yet we do this all the time with influencers, and influencers are the celebrities to millions and millions of people. And I would argue they're more than celebrities. For many people, they feel as if they're friends. They develop really intimate personal bonds with them. And so they've got this blend of scale and awareness, as well as massive amount of trust and engagement. And I think it dilutes both the brand's credibility and the influencer's credibility to just sort of do one-offs. And from where I see the space, I see it really shifting away from that. We saw Famed.it, which is YouTube's self-serve sort of automated influencer marketplace, get shut down just at the end of July. And they actually wrote a blog post about it. They said they were shutting it down because they saw they saw way better results when they weren't self-serve influencer marketing deals, when people were getting involved and it was more service-oriented and collaborative. And so I think, collaboration and long-term partnerships don't come from looking at influencers through a pure media lens. It's by working with them in the long term, so that both the influencer and the brand and product are kind of building upon each other. And yes, driving sales, but also helping build their brands collectively.
So 2 different perspectives on brand versus performance marketing. But let's get into some campaigns and some specifics with influencer marketing. Now, of course, we've all seen on the news, and especially for those of us who live on social media, I'm sure we all can probably name a couple of influencers off the top of our head who maybe do some naughty things just across the board. But let's focus in on some trends that we've seen. In fact, let's start with the elephant in the room, at least in the United States, and that is TikTok. And I just heard today that now Oracle is looking at them, so it might be Oracle clock. I don't know. But as we're diving into TikTok, let's go through a couple of very specific examples. In fact, I'm going to talk about two right now, and I'd love Kevin and Brandon to jump in and give us your thoughts on them. And the first thing is hype houses in Los Angeles, which is where I am beautifully based, and the Nelk Boys in Canada. I'd love to hear your thoughts on both of those.
Kevin, do you want to take it away?
Yeah, sure. I think what's happening in hype houses and the other houses is pretty despicable, to be honest. With, I think, the latest figure in California is now over 600,000 of COVID-19. And I get it, the influencers need to make a living, but not at the expense of risking people's lives and helping spread the virus. Health systems are so overwhelmed at the moment, and if the numbers continue to rise, and we're seeing numbers rise across Europe, so across North America, we can expect them to continue to rise as well in a couple of weeks. For influencers, and not just influencers, and Brandon mentioned this on LinkedIn, like there's idiots in all forms of life and all shapes of life. So it's not just influencers, but I think influencers are getting a bad name at the moment because of these hype houses and because of the likes of the Sway House as well. And the likes of the Nelk Boys, who are Canadian, and there was a Toronto Star piece recently about them talking about how they're throwing protests to help reopen gyms, and it's just ludicrous. And part of the problem I have with influencer marketing, and this is from the perspective of someone that is responsible for growing the Mars Discovery District brand in Canada, is that I think there is a lot of potential reputational damage when it comes to influencers. But also, and Brendan mentioned trust, that influencer followers see them as friends and people that they trust. Trust is on the decline with influencer marketing. Brendan, you posted something on LinkedIn a while back saying it's at 2%. I think it was an eMarketer report said that trust with influencers is at 2%. The Drum posted something which is a UK and European publication, published a report saying it was at 4%. And I think if influencers are to be seen as a credible marketing tactic within a marketeer's toolkit, they almost need a PR campaign, or they need an influencer campaign themselves to try and turn the narrative on them, because there are just too many things like this that, yes, it's only a few of them when you look at the whole influencer ecosystem. It's only a few bad apples that are giving the whole industry a potentially bad name. But I do think things like Hype House, and there are others which I can talk about, things like the Nelk Boys from Canada. I know we agreed not to mention the polls, but I'm not going to say any more about them. They're not doing influence marketing any good, and they're eroding any trust that might be in it.
So I want to really quickly jump in, and I will be the pop-up window here, just to quickly talk about what's happening, to give a little bit of context. So for those of you out there who are living maybe in a bubble and don't want to keep up with influencer marketing, what is happening with both the hype houses and with Nelk Boys is that essentially they're throwing parties, they're having tons of people over in their different spaces while capturing content and not doing any social distancing, and still doing what a lot of people would probably term as quite risky behavior in the middle of COVID 2020. So that's a little bit of what's going on, and that's the criticism. That's where the criticism is, I think, coming from for a lot of hype houses. And I hope my friend Taylor Lorenz, who reports on this, is quite proud of me for knowing at least a small portion of what's happening in the TikTok universe. Brendan.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, like you can't disagree with the fact that what they're doing is wrong. I will say that I think it at times feels a little bit like we like to dogpile onto influencers as like kids these days kind of mentality. And, the reality is there's idiots everywhere, like, and celebrities and, influencers. When you're dealing with people, there are risks, and brands need to go into that with eyes wide open. I mean, there are a million celebrities that have done a bunch of stupid things and been dropped by sponsors as a result. So by no means do I think it's good. I think it's really bad. Anecdotally, and I could be wrong, this is, I'd love to see if there's a study done about this. From what I'm seeing in my feed, I see way more influencers preaching, they're sending positive messages and directing people to, quality resources and encouraging people to be safe. That's what I'm seeing. But, that's not the stuff that is exciting to discuss and write about. I mean, it's pretty boring comparatively. But that said, it's, I want to reiterate, I don't think it's an excuse, and I do think it hurts their reputation. I wanted to also reference that study that Kevin brought up, and I forget the specifics of it, but I shared this study from eMarketer where they had referenced, somebody had done some poll to identify how much trust people had in influencers, and it was very, very low. And my argument was, well, first off, I questioned whether or not that was accurate, but whether or not it is, people are investing a ton of time in influencers in this era where brands, like the average Facebook video gets the average branded Facebook video gets 4.57 seconds of view time. Brands are influencers, they can create a piece of branded content and people will watch 20 minutes, they'll watch streamers, for 6 hours on end. And that's really valuable. I just wanted to contextualize that point.
Well, I think that's absolutely true. Let's bring up a point that has been brought up. There are absolutely idiots everywhere, just as there are wonderfully intelligent, great creatives that are part of the influencer industry. And I don't think anyone can debate that. Even if you don't necessarily believe in influencer marketing, there are certainly creatives who exist within that ecosystem who are doing really interesting things. We have gotten, I'm so excited, our first question. So I will go ahead. Oh, we're getting more questions. I'm going to start with this first one. Why prioritize budget for influencers when there are no measurement standards / better performance tactics? Likes aren't a success metric. So let me try to paraphrase this. I think that they're asking, why should you budget for influencers if you can't measure directly that ROI?
I promise that's not my question.
Yeah, I was going to say, Kevin, that sounds...
Kevin, are you secretly typing off camera?
My hands are here.
We hashed this out in detail in our back and forth, but I mean, long story short, that's ridiculous. Like, I'm blown away that anybody thinks this right now. Like, there are a million ways to measure influencers. Read the articles, we talk about it, but like, what do you think affiliate codes are? I'm sorry, but like, that's what they're there for. But anyways, there's a bunch of other ways, and if anybody wants to hit me up on Twitter or whatever, I can go into it. But influencers are also just insanely effective. Like, I've done campaigns where influencers just like drove so much traffic, they took down websites, they sold out products overnight, they did a pop-up and 1,000 kids show up. Morphe is doing all these collaborations with influencers, and they're setting sales records with each of these collaborations with different makeup and beauty influencers. So this idea, I mean, likes, comments, whatever, yes, they can generate that, but they can generate sales and they can build a brand as well. And so if anybody wants to talk about that in more detail, I'm happy to.
I believe that Kevin has maybe wrote a couple other audience questions, so I'm going to read another one from a Kevin fan. Kevin, you can answer this one. Most influencers work with dozens, if not more, brands. Are you worried about the dilution of messaging or customer fatigue? Kevin.
And I suppose a couple of things. One, thanks to the person that submitted that question to Brendan, but in his support, I actually think a lot of marketing professionals are really, really poor at measuring brand performance as a whole, let alone influencer marketing. So, I go back, like the industry has a problem, and it's been a problem that's been around for a long, long time in showing the effectiveness of marketing. So I think marketers, if you are responsible for a brand, and I know I'm repeating myself, but I think it's very important. If you are responsible for the growth of a brand and a business, you need to figure out your return on marketing investment. And if that includes influence marketing, then that's fine. I do think in the early stages of influencer marketing, there was a very strong focus on measuring likes, comments, shares, and engagement rates and click-through rates. And that wasn't just influencer marketing, that was digital marketing as a whole. And with a lot of these direct-to-consumer brands, the likes of Casper, which I can talk about later, there is this discrepancy between thinking that revenue generation is also brand building. The two don't necessarily go hand in hand. So the effectiveness of influencer marketing isn't just what a small group of people feel and they struggle with. Like research has shown that while marketeers are increasing their investment in influencer marketing, on the same time, they actually struggle with measuring it. And that's where my frustration grows. And I think it was one of the key frustrations from the Ad Age article that Brendan mentioned, is that we are seeing this disproportionate investment in influencer marketing when at the same time people are struggling to measure it. And I would just encourage marketing professionals to take a step back and figure out the return on marketing investment. And Goldie, to answer your question, I would say that, again, in the earlier days, there was this sort of selling yourself to the highest bidder of a brand. And yeah, it created mass confusion. And I think that eroded some of the trust that consumers would see in influencers, because every day they were promoting a different brand. And that's what happened with Casper as well. So just in case people aren't familiar with Casper, Casper is the online mattress brand. They tried to revolutionize the mattress industry, very high tech and innovative, by just simplifying it. You would walk into a store, there would be 50 different mattresses. They all look the same, but you'd no way of gauging the difference between it. So Casper came out and said, okay, we're just going to do different sizes and different price based on size. And they worked with a lot of influencers to grow their business. And they had fantastic success in growing revenue. But what ended up happening when they filed their IPO earlier this year, one of the risks that they identified in their IPO was that they sort of gave the keys of the kingdom to influencers, and they were worried that the potential negative impact that influencers could have on their brand because they don't own the messaging themselves. And there's a lot of legal cases with Casper and other influencers where they've tried to take down messages, and influencers going to different mattress companies and selling their ones, and that having an effect on Casper. And I think what this shows is that it goes back to my point around long-term and short-term. Casper didn't focus on the long-term. They were just too focused on sales, which, don't get me wrong, is extremely important, but not at the expense of the brand. And now they're suffering. Their share price has fallen, and they just released their quarterly earnings report. And analysts are very disappointed. They've said that they are leaving sales on the table compared to their competitors. And that's not the fault of influencers at all. It's the fault of the brand marketeers not focusing on long-term brand growth and sales and influencers. Marketing isn't either or. It's a huge collective. It's a melting pot of different tactics that need to ladder up to a really clear strategy and consumer insights. And again, linking it back to that return on marketing investment.
And it certainly sounds like their legal team needs to be a lot better about their contracts with their influencers and being able to have takedown notices quite quickly.
Well,
Brendan, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, very much so. It's really easy to point the finger at influencers and be like, look, they're working with all these different brands. Like, doesn't that, don't they lack credibility as a result? It's like, well, whose fault is that? If the brands aren't willing to invest in them in the long term, what do you expect to happen? I mean, in this sense, I think Kevin and I agree. It's so short-sighted to just be like, oh yeah, we'll just pay you to promote something and then move on. They're not going to be indebted to you forever. Like, they're making this is a living for them. Why should a year from now they not work with a competitor? Like, this is their livelihood. And I think ultimately this is why we're seeing so many influencers develop their own brands and products. Is they don't enjoy this process. And actually, they've been very vocal about that. They don't like the fact that brands are bouncing around. They want partners. They want people that will embrace them and their community. And I'll also add that, everybody's different, but, I've been doing this a long time now, and you would be shocked at how many influencers say no, because they just don't think something's the right fit, even if the money is there and it's really compelling. Most of them understand that this is their livelihood, and they need to maintain some level of credibility and a reputation with their fans. And cashing in the short term oftentimes compromises that. So they're saying no to, the top guys are probably saying no to 1,000 deals for every one they accept. The ratio is insane. So this idea that they're just, for sale for the highest bidder, I think is ridiculous.
So now I have a question for the both of you that is a follow-up question, even though it is literally addressed directly to Kevin. I'm going to throw this to both of you, and I will say the word "can" in here is on all caps. So bear that in mind as I read through this. Kevin, Brendan, what metrics can you use to judge the success of an influencer marketing campaign?
That's a very good question. I think, for online brands, for sure, direct purchase. It's a no-brainer. Brendan mentioned the affiliate links and everything else. You can measure direct links to purchase. No problem for online brands. Where it gets a little bit murkier is for brands that aren't online. Alcohol brands invest a ton of money in influencers, and it's very, very different, or very, very difficult to measure that. And I think as a responsible marketing professional, people need to be doing at least quarterly brand health checks, where if they are investing money across various different media channels, they need to be tracking everything. They need to be tracking sentiment. They need to be tracking share of search as well as share of voice, and looking at a brand in its entirety, not just on tactics and specifics like that. So I think for online brands, direct link to purchase is a great one. I think it's far better than the vanity metrics such as likes, comments, shares, and engagements, because again, another issue I have with influencer marketing, and I raised in the article, is it's fraud and ad bots. So I think those metrics only get you so far. And then for offline brands, I think it's very, very difficult and quite tricky, and would love to get Brendan's thoughts on it.
Yes, Brendan, we'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think the challenges associated with measurement are the same as the challenges with measuring anything. You can measure sales, you can do brand lift studies. Social listening is great to get a snapshot of kind of sentiment and volume of conversation around the brand. And you can dive into sort of like maybe how you're building up consideration. In terms of offline, obviously you could drive people in store with various incentives and see the impact of that. I'm trying to think of some examples of stuff that I've done in the past, but most of the stuff we've done that's been like really focused on measuring in store, which hasn't been a ton, is we've actually done pop-up kind of events with influencers, and that's been incredibly effective. But there's a number of ways you could do it, but ultimately it's just the same, types of studies you would use for any other marketing initiative. And I agree with Kevin. I think you don't want to necessarily. You need to look at the overarching health of the brand, and I think we are often short-sighted, in particular with influencers, in terms of how we activate them.
Beautiful. So I want to jump into this slightly confusing question, and this goes to both of you. Brands aren't truly measuring the impact of influencer marketing campaigns. How do you feel about multi-touch attribution?
Yeah, it's again another really good question, because unfortunately what Google has trained a lot of new marketing professionals is that they look at their Google Analytics, they look at the source of traffic, and then go, "Oh, that's last click attribution. All of these tactics worked. These posts worked. These social ads worked. Everything else didn't work." And again, this is sort of a bugbear of mine, is that there are too many people that work in marketing and communications and advertising that have been brought up in this digital era where they think that running a Facebook ad makes them a great marketing professional. And Google and Amazon and Facebook and Twitter have a lot to be responsible for that, because they have sort of they've misguided marketing professionals in what true impact has. So yeah, like it's an influencer might be driving to sales, but it's not taking into account all of the other marketing tactics that are going on around it, whether it's TV or out of home or search or whatever it is. So last click attribution and multi-touch point attribution, I think was the term that person used, is very, very difficult to measure. So that's why it goes back to trying to track the return on marketing investment as a whole, and not just looking at a tactic by tactic basis, even though it is important to see what is and isn't working.
Brendan, do you have any thoughts on this?
What was the first part of that question again?
Brands aren't truly measuring the impact of influencer marketing campaigns. How do you feel about multi-touch attribution?
Yeah, I would say in general, it's hard to measure everything, not just influencer marketing. In terms of multi-touch attribution, I believe YouTube has rolled out some measuring capabilities as part of, I don't know what it's called now, but kind of the rebranded Fame Bit, where that is more service oriented. So they're YouTube's influencer activation team. I'm not sure the exact specifics of how it works, but you can see a video and then they're going to be able to measure that view and track that user and see if later on they make a purchase and sale. So it's complicated for sure. But I guess, and this isn't exactly the question, but one thing I'll say is, we've done a lot of campaigns where it's just influencers doing their content and pushing it out. We've also done campaigns where we promoted influencer content in parallel to, brand content. And influencer content generally, virtually always outperforms really anything professionally produced. And if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. If somebody recognizes that person, they're going to be compelled to pay attention. If they don't, it's just another, talent in the ad. So that's not exactly the question, but I think it should just reinforce the fact that influencers are effective.
Okay, so
I'd like to explore that a little bit more, Brendan, because I agree. The Facebook ads you mentioned, was it 4 seconds? It'd be great to understand, well, how long is their overall video, and as a percentage of that total video, how much are consumers watching? Mars, the confectionery brand, came out last week with some really interesting study. Their head of neuroscience released a pretty in-depth report saying that brands only have 2 seconds to engage with consumers on an emotional level. If you translate that to influencers, consumers aren't expecting that, a brand message from the influencer. They're engaging with a piece of entertainment, a piece of content that they want to watch and lean into. And while the influencer's content might get a longer watch time, that doesn't necessarily correlate and transfer over to brand impact. So I think, and so it goes back to one of the other questions, what we need to be looking at is, if we survey a bunch of people that have watched influencer content, can we run a survey that looks at what's the brand recall within that piece of content and within that consumer group? Because otherwise, what brands are doing, and they need to be very careful of, is that brands could be pumping hundreds of thousands of dollars into growing the influencer's brand, but not necessarily their own brand. And I think as influencer marketing evolves and matures over the next couple of years, I think we're going to see more of these partnerships where the master company, whether it's a makeup company or L'Oreal or Estée Lauder, whoever it might be, will create a new line with that influencer, and they will create it under their own brand. So it's driving revenue for the business, but under that influencer's brand. And when we see all of these reports coming from TikTok and Reels and Facebook and Instagram and everyone else throwing hundreds of thousands of dollars at influencers to be on their platform, I think there is an opportunity for influencers to be less reliant on direct brand budget and product placement like you would see in a movie, or developing a piece of content just for that brand, and actually being subsidizes and making a living, especially for the higher end content creators, making a living off the money they get directly from the platforms, and then also from the products and new lines that they develop themselves.
Beautiful. So we only have a few minutes left. There's actually a few more tactical questions, which I think we will leave for the Discord. So I wanted to leave some time at the very end for Brendan and Kevin to give us their closing remarks on how they feel about influencer marketing, as well as just branding and marketing in general in this very fascinating ecosystem that we currently live in. Brendan, why don't you start?
Sure. Yeah, I think in short, most brands and ad agencies have been pretty short-sighted in terms of how they've approached influencer marketing. They have treated them as media platforms and distribution partners. And I would agree that that's eroded trust and credibility for both the brand and the influencers. But that's not the direction that this space is headed. We see Ninja doing a custom can with Red Bull. He's got a multi-year contract with Adidas. His first shoe sold out in something like 40 minutes. I think we're going to be seeing a lot more partnerships along those lines that really apply the lessons learned of the best influencer and athlete endorsements of the 80s and 90s. Think Nike and Jordan once again. Like those partnerships are really key, and I think that's really the direction it's going to be headed. And I would also add that if brands don't partner with influencers, the influencers will launch their own brands, and they've already really started disrupting a lot of different categories.
Amazing. Kevin, what are your last thoughts?
I think, so we started off this debate back in January. The world was completely different. No one had a clue what was coming down the line. And Brendan and I on Twitter and LinkedIn and Ad Age got into very heated debates. And at the time, I was very, very skeptical and not a believer in influencer marketing. And I think with working and chatting with the likes of Brendan, who I would say is probably leading the way in terms of influencer marketing, while I'm still skeptical, I'm a little bit less skeptical. If I was investing money in influencer marketing, I would want to work with someone like Brendan. But what it comes down to is, as someone, again, who is responsible for the growth of a brand and a business, for me, there are too many risks at the moment with influencer marketing. And I've mentioned fraud, I've mentioned lack of trust, we've mentioned measurement, and also, to Brendan's point around partnerships, my worry with partnerships is that you are still relying on the fame of that creator and nothing really else. There isn't a reason for why that person is famous that they can fall back on. So to give you an example, you mentioned Michael Jordan, one of the best celebrity endorsements and partnerships in history. It was incredible. Even if Michael Jordan got into scandal after scandal, there was still the fallback that he was the best basketball player in the world. Kids, adults, everyone looked up to him as the poster boy of what an athlete and sports star should be. My worry with influencers is that they don't have that fame, whether they're a sports star or a musician, to fall back on. And I think one of the most interesting examples at the moment is Jeffree Star released a new line called Orgy, even though he appeals to a lot of young kids, which is really, really disturbing for me. But then also there's scandals and accusations around it, and now there's talks of using bots to comment on the most recent video. And Jeffree Star doesn't have that stardom to fall back on from being a basketball player, NFL star, a musician. And that's one of my biggest hesitations, is that if something goes wrong, yes, and there are idiots everywhere and you can have clauses and get out of jail free cards. But even if the best athletes in the world do something wrong, people still look up to them because they are just that. They are the best athlete in the world. And that would just be my caution, on top of everything else I mentioned around fraud and lack of trust and things like that. So while I think it's good for marketeers to be testing and trying new things, I would not be investing the amount of focus on influencer marketing as some of the research suggests. And marketing is too complicated to go that heavy into one tactic.
Amazing. So I think we covered both sides. We didn't get into all of the amazing deep down dives that I wanted to do, but perhaps we can jump over to the wonderful VidCon Discord, which everyone should sign up for. We will be continuing the conversation there. In fact, I believe at least one of us will be over there. So feel free to ask your in-depth technical questions over there that we haven't had time to address. Thank you all so much for jumping in and listening to this session. Thank you so much to Kevin and Brendan, what I enjoy the most is that they are basically now friends because they had a disagreement. So that really should be your main takeaway about influencer marketing, is make more friends. Thank you everyone again.
Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks so much.
Stay tuned for more VidCon. Bye guys.